Most people hear the line as if it's settled fact. Edgar Cayce said the United States would become two countries by 2026. But that claim almost never shows up as a clean, verifiable quote. What spreads is a packaged verdict. And the moment it gets attached to a Great Divide map, it stops behaving like a prediction and starts acting like a blueprint. A map doesn't ask you to wonder. A map tells your mind where the line is supposed to be. That's why it lands so hard right now. You don't need to be into prophecy to recognize the split already living inside everyday life states, moving like separate worlds, families breaking into rival realities, people choosing where to live based on what they fear the other side will do next. The map doesn't have to create division. It only has to label it. Once it labels it, you begin to see every headline as proof the border is forming. But there's a contradiction almost nobody forces into the open. If Cayce truly said it, why is the evidence almost always incomplete screenshots, secondhand summaries, viral captions, while the specific deadline stays sharp and unforgettable? Why does by 2026 appear like a locking mechanism, a short fuse that turns curiosity into urgency? Because a prophecy without a date is a story. A prophecy with a date becomes pressure, and pressure is how people accept outcomes before they are officially real. Here's what makes the Great Divide map disturbing. There isn't one version. The line shifts, the cut changes, the framing evolves, yet the conclusion stays the same: two countries. That isn't how stable historical documentation behaves. That's how a narrative behaves when it's being tuned to fit the moment. And when the details keep moving but the destination never does, the question stops being, is the map accurate? And becomes, who needs the map to feel inevitable? So the real reveal isn't a dramatic quote, it's the chain, where the attribution to Cayce actually comes from, what was added later, and exactly when the 2026 deadline gets welded to it. Who released the version of the map you're seeing, and why does it function less like interpretation and more like preparation? If you leave now, you keep the shock. If you stay, you get the missing piece. The mechanism that turns a name, a date, and a line on a map into a belief strong enough to reshape what people think is already happening. The urgency in this topic doesn't come from the sentence itself. It comes from the precise fit between a name, a deadline, and a consequence. The moment by 2026 gets welded to the claim, your brain stops hearing it as theory and starts hearing it as a countdown. And once a countdown is running, you don't wait for proof, you start scanning the present for confirmation, as if the country is only waiting for a stamp to become what the line already suggests. The first thing an investigator notices here is the smell of an incomplete file. This isn't about belief, it's about origin. A real attribution survives bright light, context, primary record, a clear chain of how the words traveled and why they stayed intact. A constructed attribution tends to skip that chain and lean on repetition, because repetition can imitate evidence. Say it often enough, and people remember the claim instead of remembering where it came from. That's where the Great Divide map becomes more than an image. Text invites debate. A map bypasses debate by giving the mind a finished shape. A drawn line feels like a future already seen, already decided. Even if you don't accept prophecy, you understand maps as tools for planning, not metaphors for conversation. The map doesn't argue with you. It trains your perception to treat stability as temporary. What makes it more disturbing is how the map rarely behaves like a stable document. It circulates in variations, different cuts, different contours, while the conclusion stays fixed. Two countries, that doesn't automatically prove fabrication, but it does reveal pressure. Something is being adjusted to remain believable in the emotional climate of the moment. When the form keeps changing to fit the fear of now, you're not just looking at a vision, you're looking at a narrative being tuned. And that's where the necessary question begins to tighten without offering relief. If the population starts acting like the nation is already split, choosing sides early, relocating, hardening relationships, treating the other half as foreign, who benefits from that shift happening ahead of any official border? Because once a country behaves like two, the separation stops being a prophecy and starts becoming a consequence. And the feeling that the map is only revealing what already is may be the missing mechanism that makes the divide real. The next step is facing what that deadline does to ordinary people, not believers or skeptics. When a claim is tied to a near date, it starts invading small decisions: where to live, who to trust, what to store, what to avoid. Not because someone became extreme, but because the brain hates sitting still in front of a risk that feels scheduled. A deadline turns abstract fear into private urgency. That's when two countries stop sounding like distant theory and starts feeling like separation in daily life. You begin to notice how people already move as if two nations are overlapping the same land, two realities, two moral codes, two definitions of safety. No official split is required for that to function. It only takes the habit of treating the other side as permanent threat. The divide begins when ordinary coexistence becomes the exception. At that point, the map doesn't behave like a prediction, it behaves like permission. It gives shape to an emotion that was already loose, and loose emotions hunt for structure because structure hurts less. The Great Divide map offers a simple outline for a complex collapse, and simplicity is addictive when the mind is exhausted. The line becomes a dangerous kind of relief. At least now I understand, but that relief comes with a cost. Once you accept the line as destiny, you start reorganizing identity around it. You label closure as clarity, fear as prudence, suspicion as being awake, and trained fear doesn't stay quiet. It demands constant confirmation, new signals, fresh proof, until every tension becomes evidence and every headline becomes a step toward the border. That's why the question that rises here isn't poetic, it's practical and uncomfortable. If belief in a future split changes choices in the present, who benefits from installing that belief with such precision and such speed? And if the speed isn't coming from fate but from intent, then the map isn't describing the country. It's pushing the country to fit inside it. Now the story snaps back to the most uncomfortable angle. The link between Edgar Cayce, two countries, and the deadline by 2026 can't survive on conviction alone. It needs a traceable trail. And this is where it starts to feel off, because what spreads usually arrives sealed with no room to see how it was assembled. When the chain is real, you can follow it. When it's constructed, you're handed the conclusion, not the process. The problem isn't only maybe he didn't say it, the problem is how the attribution behaves. It dodges context and leans on authority. Instead of showing where it came from, it demands trust. And trust without a trail is exactly what a short deadline exploits, because it pushes you to decide before you examine. It makes verification feel like wasted time, and wasted time feel like lost survival. Here, the implied threat becomes clear. Urgency isn't trying to help you understand, it's trying to make you align. Once you align, you choose sides earlier, harden relationships, treat disagreement as risk. Two countries starts as a claim and ends as behavior. And mass behavior manufactures reality even when the origin was weak. At this point, the Great Divide map works like an object that turns insecurity into visual certainty. It doesn't prove anything, but it creates the feeling that someone has already seen the ending. That shifts the weight of everything. Instability becomes a sign, conflict becomes destiny, debate becomes a countdown. You start accepting the line not because it was demonstrated, but because it matches your exhaustion. And the question tightening now is simple, dry, impossible to ignore. If the evidence isn't as solid as the urgency demands, why is the urgency so perfectly calibrated? Who needs the idea of division to feel inevitable before any decisive fact exists? Because when a file is presented as a final revelation without showing the path, the revelation may not be about the country's future. It may be about who is trying to steer the present. Now it gets more concrete, because the map doesn't only touch emotion, it triggers territorial instinct. When you see a line cutting across the country, your brain starts translating everything into before and after. Routes, invisible borders, pressure points, places that become corridors or chokeholds. You don't have to want that reaction. The mind does it automatically, because maps are survival language. That's exactly why the map carries more force than any sentence ever could. The unsettling detail is that the divide doesn't need to become official to start functioning. It begins the moment people behave as if it already exists. You see it when a parent's safety turns into quiet paranoia, when neighborhoods become filters, when families and businesses make choices not based on what is true today, but on what they fear will be true tomorrow. The strongest border isn't drawn on paper. It's installed inside people, and once it's installed, it defends itself. This is where the Great Divide map starts to feel almost inevitable. It fits the hunger for control during a silent collapse. An exhausted country wants a clear cause, a clean explanation that organizes chaos. The map offers that without demanding effort. It gives a simple outline for a complex crisis. And simple outlines spread faster than truth because truth is usually too messy to go viral. What makes the scenario heavier is the consequence nobody wants to say out loud. If a number like 2026 becomes the emotional date of rupture, many people will prepare for a split long before any confirmation, and that preparation rewires the social fabric. Relationships become strategy, choices become defense, dialogue becomes suspicion. When that becomes normal, separation stops being an event. It becomes a collective habit. So at this point, the mystery deepens not through more theory, but through one practical question that feels dangerous precisely because it's practical. What if the map isn't predicting division, but training the country to accept it? What if the most prophetic part of this story isn't the line on paper, but the way it reorganizes fear, identity, and decision inside millions of people on a deadline close enough that no one has room to breathe? At this point, it turns dry and unavoidable. The Great Divide map doesn't have to be correct to work. It only has to feel plausible enough that people start rearranging their lives around it. That's how a narrative leaves the realm of prophecy and becomes pressure. The line becomes a behavioral suggestion disguised as a forecast, and once behavior shifts, the country begins moving in the direction the drawing implies. This is where the Cayce name matters in a colder way than belief. A famous name isn't just credibility, it's insulation. It reduces the instinct to question, because questioning starts to look like disrespect instead of verification. And once verification is weakened, urgency gets a clear runway. The story can run without proving itself, because it has already been accepted as if it had. What weighs heavier now is how the date functions as an accelerator. 2026 is close enough to generate anxiety, but far enough to let anxiety mature into habit. You change small things just in case, and small changes become routine. A routine repeated by enough people becomes social shift, and social shift, given time, becomes structure. That's why the core of the title returns sharper. Why Edgar Cayce said the USA would be two countries by 2026 isn't only a question about the past or about prediction. It's a question about mechanism. Who benefits when a nation begins preparing for a split before a split exists? Who profits when two countries becomes a comforting answer to chaos, delivered in the form of a map? And now the tension reaches the edge, because only one part remains. The final piece isn't a neat conclusion. It's the turn that lets you see whether this is a preserved warning, a stacked interpretation, or a tool designed to push mass choices. What's still locked is the key inside the file, where the story actually gets welded together and who held the torch. The moment you try to treat this like a real file instead of a viral claim, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. If Edgar Cayce truly delivered a clean statement that the United States would become two countries by 2026, it should be easy to trace to an exact record, an exact wording, an exact context. Instead, what people usually pass around is a finished, slogan-tight, modern, built to travel. That gap between specific deadline and hard-to-pin source isn't a small problem. It's the pressure point. Then the map complicates it in a way that's even more uncomfortable. The Great Divide map circulating today often looks like a single authoritative artifact, but its style matches a much later tradition, prophecy by cartography, where lines on a country are used to make fear feel measurable. In that tradition, maps don't serve evidence, they serve certainty. They don't ask you to investigate, they train you to anticipate. A line on paper becomes permission to treat neighbors like a future border. Once you notice that, the deadline stops feeling like prophecy and starts feeling like a trigger. 2026 is close enough to create urgency, but not so close that the claim has to survive immediate verification. It gives the narrative time to spread, time to harden, time to become identity. People don't need official separation to begin living. Like separation is coming, moving, isolating, choosing sides, interpreting every conflict as confirmation. The country begins to behave like two, long before it becomes two. And here's the part that makes the map dangerous, even if it's wrong. It rewards simplification. A tired society wants one clean shape for a messy collapse. The map offers that shape It turns a complicated breakdown trust, institutions, culture, economics into a single visual cut that is psychologically addictive because it feels like control. But the control is borrowed, and it comes with a hidden exchange. You trade complexity for certainty and certainty for suspicion. So the question you're left holding isn't, will it happen? It's, what exactly is this combination meant to do to people right now? Because if the chain from Cayce to the deadline to the map is weak, the urgency is the product and someone is selling it. And if the chain is strong, the urgency isn't content, it's warning. Either way, the same threat remains. The line becomes real the moment enough people start living as if it already is. The moment you try to treat this like a real file instead of a viral claim, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. If Edgar Cayce truly delivered a clean statement that the United States would become two countries by 2026, it should be easy to trace to an exact record, an exact wording, an exact context. Instead, what people usually pass around is a finished, slogan-tight, modern, built to travel. That gap between specific deadline and hard-to-pin source isn't a small problem. It's the pressure point. Then the map complicates it in a way that's even more uncomfortable. The Great Divide map circulating today often looks like a single authoritative artifact, but its style matches a much later tradition, prophecy by cartography, where lines on a country are used to make fear feel measurable. In that tradition, maps don't serve evidence, they serve certainty. They don't ask you to investigate, they train you to anticipate. A line on paper becomes permission to treat neighbors like a future border. Once you notice that, the deadline stops feeling like prophecy and starts feeling like a trigger. 2026 is close enough to create urgency, but not so close that the claim has to survive immediate verification. It gives the narrative time to spread, time to harden, time to become identity. People don't need official separation to begin living. Like separation is coming, moving, isolating, choosing sides, interpreting every conflict as confirmation. The country begins to behave like two, long before it becomes two. And here's the part that makes the map dangerous, even if it's wrong. It rewards simplification. A tired society wants one clean shape for a messy collapse. The map offers that shape. It turns a complicated breakdown trust, institutions, culture, economics into a single visual cut that is psychologically addictive because it feels like control. But the control is borrowed, and it comes with a hidden exchange. You trade complexity for certainty and certainty for suspicion. So the question you're left holding isn't, will it happen? It's, what exactly is this combination meant to do to people right now? Because if the chain from Cayce to the deadline to the map is weak, the urgency is the product and someone is selling it. And if the chain is strong, the urgency isn't content, it's warning. Either way, the same threat remains. The line becomes real the moment enough people start living as if it already is.